Prairie Lotus, Chapter 7. Papa opened the door with Hannah behind him. "Evening, Edmonds." It was Mr. Harris. "I'll be right along," Papa said. "We're meeting at the depot. I'll wait for you out here." Papa closed the door and took his hat from the wall peg. Hannah noticed then that he was wearing his good white shirt and that his hair was carefully combed. He looked back at her and shrugged. "Harris came by the shop site this afternoon," he said. "A couple of folks have been to see him about your being in school, so the school board called a meeting tonight." Hannah reached for her bonnet. "What do you think you're about?" "You stay right here, young lady. Harris wants me to attend the meeting, but he and the other board members and Miss Walters are going to do the talking, and that's as it should be." He opened the door. "Don't wait up," he said over his shoulder. "I'll tell you about it in the morning." The sun had not set yet, so Hannah could see the two men walking up the street toward the depot at the north end of town. The depot stood next to the railroad tracks. It had windows on all four walls. If she crouched down between two of the windows, she would probably be able to hear through the chinks in the boards. As she tied on her bonnet, she felt a twinge of regret about disobeying Papa. It was her duty and responsibility to obey him. But there were times when she simply couldn't, and over the past year or so, those times had become more frequent. She thought it might be partly because Mama was no longer with them. Sometimes Mama had taken her side in an argument, and together they'd been able to talk Papa around. Now Hannah had to stand up to Papa alone. Irritable, snappish, dour, resentful, all his bad traits had worsened after Mama died. Hannah often found it easier not to argue with him, just to do what she wanted and hope he didn't find out. This time she planned to be back long before he was, so he would never even know she'd been gone. She went out the back door so she could walk behind the stores and houses instead of down Main Street. The grocery was the last building before the depot. She paused for a moment in its shadow. Then, keeping wide of the depot, Hannah walked to its far side where she couldn't be seen from the street. Lantern lights shone from the windows. She took a quick glance around, then hurried closer, bent over double, and crept to the east end of the building. The sun was almost gone now, and most of the depot stood in shadow. She crouched with her back against the wall. Sure enough, she heard a low rumble of voices inside. She could not make out words, but it seemed that the meeting had not yet begun. The creak of the door's hinges meant that people were still arriving. Once the meeting started, they would be speaking one at a time, and she'd be able to hear more clearly. She'd have to pay close attention so she could leave before the meeting ended and get home before Papa did. Suddenly, Hannah saw movement on her right. Someone was approaching the depot stealthily, just as she had. Heart thumping, Hannah stayed very still. If I don't move, maybe they won't see me, whoever they are. To her complete dismay, the person headed straight in her direction. Then she heard a loud whisper. "I knew you'd be here." Even in the gloom, she could see his smile. It was Sam. "What are you doing?" she whispered back as a wave of panic rolled over her. "Why is he here? Now I'm twice as likely to get caught." He crouched next to her. "Same as you," he said. "I want to hear what they say." "Are your folks here?" "Just my pa. My ma, she keeps to herself mostly. Did you really have oranges every day?" Taken aback by the abrupt change of subject, she stared at him for a moment and found herself answering the question. "Yes. No, not every day, but almost. Do you think I was lying?" "Of course not." "Then why did you ask me again?" "Just so's I could hear you say it one more time." He shook his head, then grinned. "An orange every day. Wouldn't that be something?" Inside, Mr. Harris's voice cut through the murmurs. "Can we all come to order, please?" Hannah put a finger to her lips and saw that Sam was making the same gesture. She realized then that she was glad not to be alone. No, that wasn't quite right, because it wouldn't feel the same with just anyone. She was glad he was here, and her cheeks warmed at the thought. The noise settled. Mr. Harris went on. "I know folks here have some concerns about a new student who began attending school yesterday. You'll all be able to have your say, but I'd like to start with Miss Walters." A quiet moment, and then Miss Walters began to speak. Her voice did not carry as well as Mr. Harris's. Slowly, cautiously, Hannah rose from her crouch, so she was standing next to the window rather than hunched beneath it. Sam did the same on the other side of the window. Attended school yesterday and today. I would like you to know that she is a fine student. She's completed herself perfectly and has been kind to her schoolmates as well. Hannah frowned. Kind? When? Miss Walters went on. There has been absolutely no trouble resulting from her attendance, nor do I expect any. Indeed, I would say the opposite, that her scholarship and behavior will serve as an excellent example to the other students. But she doesn't belong here. I don't want her in school with my children. Order! Mr. Harris raised his voice. I said you'd all be given a chance to speak. I intend to run this meeting in a civilized manner, and if anyone causes trouble, why, I'll have to bring in the justice of the peace. The crowd laughed, for Mr. Harris himself was the justice of the peace. Thank you, Miss Walters, he said next. Now I call on Philip Harris. Laughter again. Mr. Harris was calling on himself. I've known Ben Edmonds for a good few years, he said. First met him out in Kansas. He helped me build a house there for me and Sarah Lynn and our children. Went without a house himself so we could get ours done first. Fetched us goods from town more than once, a 30-mile walk each way. You couldn't ask for a better neighbor. So you've heard Miss Walters talk about his daughter, and now I've told you about Ben himself. To my mind, they're exactly the kind of folks we want here in LaForge. What about his wife? She's a Chinaman. That's what I heard. Where is she? How come no one's met her yet? Too ashamed, I'll wager. He knows she's not fit to live among decent folks. The last voice a man's. A man who had never known Mama. Hannah's hands curled into fists so tight that her nails cut into her palms. She swallowed hard, then glanced at Sam. He'd turned to face the wall, his ear close to the window. In the dim light from inside, she could see his lips pressed together, his brow rigid. He did not look at her. She drew in a quick breath. Was Sam's father the one who had said that? Everyone seemed to be talking at once, their voices agitated. The commotion went on for a few moments until the sharp rap of wood on wood. Order! Mr. Harris shouted. We're going to talk about this as reasonable folks, as Christians, do you hear me? Now, Bill Baxter, you seem to want to speak, so go on ahead. Hannah remembered that Baxter was Sam's last name. She kept very still, careful not to look in his direction. Harris, we're all here to build new lives for our families, said Mr. Baxter. We've got the chance to make this town just the way we want it, and what we don't want is trouble. At least we agree on that, Hannah thought grimly. I wouldn't argue with a single thing you've said, Mr. Harris's voice again. As far as I can see, neither Edmonds nor his daughter has bothered anyone in the least. Fact is, their family's already done quite a bit of good here in LaForge. Charlie Hart, where are you? Right here, Mr. Harris. Charlie, where are you working these days? Main Street, putting up Edmonds' new store building. Is he paying you fairly? A good wage, and my dinner as well. A new building, Mr. Harris said. You've all seen the site across from Wilson's Hardware. It's going up right now, which means that Edmonds is a regular customer at Wilson's store, and the lumberyard, and the livery, and most of the places in town. Anybody here got objections to taking his money? I sure don't. A few guffaws. And likely you've heard by now that it's going to be a shop for dress goods. I imagine the ladies are looking forward to the grand opening. The room had grown quiet. There was a brief rumble of voices before Mr. Harris spoke again. I think it's time we heard from Ben Edmonds now. Papa,